Colorado Territory, 1872. The blood-orange sun cracked over the jagged mountain line as Samuel Reed squinted against its harsh glare, pulling his hat lower. At 25, he'd already lived enough years on the frontier to know three undeniable truths. A man travels lighter alone, attachments get folks killed, and love is a luxury no cowhand can afford, especially not one carrying the shadows he did. The cold mountain air bit at his face as he guided his dun gelding down the steep trail toward the small settlement of Elk Valley. 2 years of driving cattle across the unforgiving terrain had hardened his youthful features, though beneath his trail dust and light stubble, his handsome face still betrayed the boy who'd once believed in something beyond survival. Just supplies and gone. Thunder, he murmured to his horse, patting its muscular neck. No lingering. No conversations. No complications. The horse snorted as if in disagreement, steam rising from its nostrils in the early morning chill. Samuel adjusted the Colt revolver at his hip, a necessary companion in a land where law remained a distant concept. His lean, athletic frame straightened in the saddle as the first buildings of Elk Valley came into view. The remote settlement was little more than a general store, saloon, and scattered homesteads, but it represented danger nonetheless. Danger came in the form of people and their expectations, their questions, their desire to know a man's business. 3 weeks on the trail without seeing a soul, he told Thunder. Let's keep it that way, even in town. The truth that Samuel Reed carried like a physical weight was simple. A man stays alive by staying alone. He'd watched what happened to those who put down roots, who built families, who trusted in the permanence of love in a land that took more than it gave. His own father had died with a wife and son to mourn him after raiders attacked their Kansas homestead. Samuel had been just 16, but he'd learned the lesson written in his father's blood. Attachments were vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities got men killed. What Samuel wanted was uncomplicated. Earn enough to buy a small plot of land in some distant corner of the territory, far from other settlers, where a man could live by his own rules. What he needed, though he'd never admit it even in the loneliest hours of night watch, was something to fill the hollow space that had grown inside him with each passing season of solitude. As he rode into town, Samuel kept his eyes forward, ignoring the few townsfolk already moving about their morning business. The general store would have what he needed: ammunition, coffee, dried beans, and tobacco. Then he'd be back on the trail before anyone could remember his face. But fate rarely consulted a man's carefully laid plans in the West. The first gunshot cracked the morning stillness like lightning. Samuel instinctively pulled Thunder to a halt, his hand finding his revolver as 3 more shots followed in quick succession. Shouts erupted from the direction of the general store, and despite every instinct telling him to turn and ride, Samuel found himself spurring Thunder forward. "Everybody stay back," a man's voice bellowed from inside the store as Samuel dismounted. "I'll kill her sure as shootin' if anyone comes through that door." Samuel pressed himself against the rough-hewn wall beside the store's entrance, drawing his revolver. Inside, he heard a woman's frightened but defiant voice. "My father will be back any minute. Take what you want and leave." "Shut your mouth, girl. I ain't leavin' till I get what I came for." Samuel peered through the window. A large man with a filthy beard held a revolver to the head of a young woman standing behind the counter. Her wide eyes shone with fear, but her chin remained high, a cascade of honey-blonde hair falling over shoulders draped in a simple blue calico dress. She couldn't be more than 20 years old. 2 bodies lay on the floor, one an older man with a store apron, another a rough-looking drifter. The situation was clear enough: a robbery gone wrong, and now a desperate man with nothing to lose. Every rational thought told Samuel to walk away. This wasn't his fight. Attachment to strangers was as dangerous as attachment to kin. But something in the young woman's eyes, the stubborn refusal to cower even with death pressed against her temple, held him in place. Before he could reconsider, Samuel called out, "Mister, I'm just a passing cowhand. I've got no quarrel with you. How about you let the lady go, and we can both ride out of here?" "Who the hell are you?" the man snarled. "Get in here where I can see you. Hands hot." Samuel took a deep breath, holstered his weapon, and stepped through the doorway, hands raised. "Name's Reed. Just passing through." The robber was wild-eyed, blood spattered across his shirt, Whether his own or someone else's, Samuel couldn't tell. You a lawman? Just a cowboy, Samuel replied evenly, taking in the young woman's face. Up close, her features were even more striking. High cheekbones, clear blue eyes, and a small scar above her right eyebrow that somehow made her beauty more authentic. What's your name, miss? Abigail Hayes, she answered, her voice steadier than it had any right to be. And this man just shot my uncle and a customer. Shut up. The robber pressed the gun harder against her temple. I need horses, supplies, and money. Then I'm gone. Samuel nodded slowly. I can help with that. My horse is right outside, fastest in 3 territories. You can have him. The robber's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Why would you give me your horse? Because I value this lady's life more than a horse that can be replaced. It was the truth, Samuel realized with surprise. Though he'd never seen Abigail Hayes before this moment, something about her courage in the face of death stirred something he'd thought long buried. Go get the horse, the robber ordered. Bring him to the door where I can see. Samuel backed toward the door, maintaining eye contact with Abigail. It's going to be all right, he said quietly. Outside, Samuel quickly untied Thunder's reins and led him to the doorway, standing directly in the line of fire. Here's the horse, as promised. Now let the lady step away. The robber hesitated, his grip on Abigail tightening. The money first. Samuel saw Abigail's eyes flick towards something behind the counter. Understanding passed between them in that brief glance. There's a strong box under the counter, Samuel said. Miss Hayes can get it for you if you give her some space. The robber pushed Abigail forward slightly. Get it. No tricks. As Abigail bent to retrieve the box, Samuel subtly shifted Thunder to block the doorway. When she straightened up with the metal box in hand, her eyes met Samuel's again, a silent communication that somehow, despite being strangers, they both understood perfectly. Here, she said, sliding the box across the counter. The robber reached for it with his free hand, momentarily dividing his attention. Samuel moved with the speed that had saved his life more than once on the frontier. He yanked Thunder's reins hard, causing the horse to rear and block the robber's line of sight. In the same motion, he drew his revolver and fired a single shot that caught the robber in the shoulder of his gun arm. The man howled in pain, his weapon clattering to the floor as Abigail ducked behind the counter. Samuel vaulted over the fallen chair, kicking the dropped gun away and pressing his own revolver against the robber's chest. It's over, Samuel said coldly. On the ground. The fight went out of the man as quickly as it had erupted. Samuel bound his hands with leather straps from the store as Abigail emerged from behind the counter, rushing to check on the fallen men. Uncle George is still breathing, she called out, pressing a cloth to the older man's chest wound. The customer, unfortunately, was beyond help. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. The town's doctor was summoned, the wounded were tended to, and the local sheriff, who'd been investigating a cattle dispute at a nearby ranch, returned to take the robber into custody. Through it all, Samuel found himself unable to leave, drawn to remain by Abigail's side as she handled the crisis with remarkable composure. As evening fell, Samuel sat with Abigail on the porch of the store, a cup of coffee warming his hands. My father died last winter, she explained, staring into the gathering darkness. Uncle George and I have been running the store since then. He's the only family I have left. Samuel nodded, understanding loss all too well. The doctor said he'll recover. Thanks to you. Abigail turned to face him, her blue eyes reflecting the last light of day. You could have ridden past. Most would have. Samuel shifted uncomfortably. I was planning to, but you didn't. A small smile touched her lips. Why? It was a simple question without a simple answer. Samuel had spent years avoiding exactly this kind of entanglement, yet when the moment came, he'd chosen differently. I don't rightly know, he admitted, the honesty surprising himself as much as her. Something wouldn't let me ride away. Abigail studied him with unexpected perception. You're not used to staying, are you, Mr. Reed? Samuel, he corrected. And no, I'm not. Will you stay tonight? The doctor said Uncle George is asking for you. She hesitated. And I'd rest easier knowing you were near, at least until morning. Every instinct built over years of solitary survival warned Samuel to refuse, to saddle Thunder and ride out before he formed connections that could only lead to pain. Yet when he opened his mouth, what emerged was, I'll stay. One night became three as George Hayes fought fever and infection. Samuel found himself helping around the store, fixing the broken front window, and taking inventory of the supplies lost in the robbery. Each day, he told himself he would leave the next morning. Each night, he found another reason to stay. On the fourth day, as Samuel mended a broken shelf behind the counter, Abigail approached him with 2 cups of coffee. "You're good with your hands," she observed, handing him the steaming cup. Samuel accepted it with a nod. Necessary skill on the frontier. "Where were you headed before?" She gestured to the store, still bearing the marks of violence. "Nowhere particular," he answered truthfully. "Following the season. I've been driving cattle for the Hollister outfit up north." "Sounds lonely," Abigail said softly. Samuel looked up, meeting her gaze. "It's safer that way." "Is it?" She leaned against the counter, her blonde hair catching the morning light. At 20 years old, Abigail Hayes possessed a wisdom beyond her years, forged by frontier hardship and responsibility thrust upon her too young. "I found the most dangerous thing out here is facing it alone." Her words struck too close to the truth Samuel had been avoiding. "Your uncle's improving. I should be moving on soon." Disappointment flickered across her features, quickly masked. "Of course. I'm sure you have places to be." That evening, Sheriff Tanner returned with news that the robber had confessed to 3 other murders across the territory. "You likely saved more than just Miss Hayes and her uncle," he told Samuel as they stood outside the store. "We've been tracking this fellow for months." "Just happened to be passing through," Samuel demurred. The sheriff studied him with knowing eyes. Sometimes a man finds himself exactly where he needs to be, whether he planned it or not. He glanced toward the store where Abigail was visible through the window. Miss Hayes is well respected in these parts. Smart businesswoman. Turned down 3 proposals last year alone. Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "I'm leaving tomorrow." "Are you now?" The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "Well, good luck to you, Reed. The territory needs more men like you, ones who step up when it matters." That night, unable to sleep, Samuel sat on the small porch behind the store, staring at stars scattered like silver dollars across the vast Colorado sky. The sound of the door opening behind him didn't surprise him. Somehow, he'd known Abigail would come. "Uncle George asked me to thank you again," she said, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders as she sat beside him. "He says you're welcome to stay on if you need work. We could use the help around here." Samuel kept his eyes on the stars. "I'm not one for settling. Because of what happened to your family." When he turned to her with surprise, she added, "You call out for them in your sleep sometimes." Heat rose in Samuel's face. "I didn't realize." "You don't have to tell me," Abigail said gently. "We all carry something out here." Perhaps it was the darkness, or the strange intimacy they'd forged through danger, but Samuel found himself speaking of things he'd kept buried for years. "Raiders hit our homestead when I was 16. My father died defending it. My mother from grief the winter after." Abigail's hand found his in the darkness. "I'm sorry. I learned that day that loving people is a weakness out here. The more you care, the more vulnerable you are. And yet," she said softly, "you risked your life for a stranger." Samuel had no answer for that contradiction. They sat in silence, her hand warm in his, until she quietly returned inside, leaving him with thoughts more tangled than when he'd begun. Dawn found him saddling Thunder, determined to outrun the dangerous feelings taking root in his chest. Abigail appeared in the yard, watching him with sad understanding. "I knew you'd leave," she said without accusation. Samuel tightened the cinch, avoiding her eyes. "It's better this way." "For whom?" The simple question stopped him short. For whom indeed? The answer had always seemed clear before, for everyone. Attachment bred vulnerability. Vulnerability led to death. But standing here in the pale morning light, the certainty that had guided him for years suddenly seemed hollow. Before he could respond, hoofbeats sounded from the road. 3 riders appeared, their expressions grim as they approached the store. Samuel recognized them immediately as the type of men he'd spent years avoiding, trouble on horseback. "Miss Hayes," the leader called out, a tall man with a scar running from eye to chin. "We've come to discuss your father's debt." Abigail stiffened. "My father had no debts with you, Mr. Chandler. He borrowed money last winter for supplies. With interest, it comes to $500. The man dismounted, his spurs jangling ominously. "Or we could take payment in other ways." Samuel moved to stand beside Abigail, his hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. There a problem here? The man, Chandler, looked Samuel over with cold calculation. This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. This is between me and the Hayes family. My father never borrowed from you, Abigail insisted, her voice steady despite the fear Samuel could sense radiating from her. He'd rather have starved. Well, he's not here to dispute it, is he? Chandler smiled unpleasantly. We'll give you 1 week to come up with the money. After that, we'll take the store as payment. As the men rode away, Abigail's composure cracked. They're lying. Father would never deal with Chandler. Everyone knows he's been trying to control all the businesses in Elk Valley. Samuel watched the retreating riders with narrowed eyes. Does the sheriff know about this? Chandler's been careful to stay just on the right side of the law. Abigail's hands trembled slightly. With Uncle George still recovering and the losses from the robbery, we don't have that kind of money. Samuel looked down at her. This young woman who had faced death without flinching, who had buried her father and shouldered responsibilities that would crush many men twice her age. In that moment, he knew he couldn't ride away. Not yet. I'm staying, he said simply. The surprise and relief that washed over her face twisted something in his chest. Why? Samuel gestured toward the departing men. Those aren't the kind of wolves that hunt alone. You need help. What he didn't say was that something fundamental had shifted inside him the moment he'd seen fear in her eyes. The instinct to protect her overrode the survival rules he'd lived by for nearly a decade. Over the next days, Samuel threw himself into securing the store, reinforcing doors and windows, and making discreet inquiries about Chandler and his operations. What he discovered troubled him deeply. Chandler had been systematically pressuring businesses throughout the valley, creating false debts, and using violence when necessary to seize property. 3 other shopkeepers had already sold out under mysterious circumstances. As they worked side by side in the store, Samuel found himself studying Abigail when she wasn't looking. The determined set of her jaw when dealing with difficult customers, the gentle way she tended to her recovering uncle, the surprising sound of her laughter when he told a rare story from his cattle-driving days. You're different than I expected, she told him one evening as they closed up the store. Samuel paused in counting the day's earnings. How so? For someone so determined to avoid connections, you're remarkably good with people. She smiled. I've noticed how the customers respond to you. Even Mrs. Patterson smiled today, and she hasn't smiled since President Lincoln was alive. Samuel found himself returning her smile. Maybe I've just had the wrong company all these years. As the deadline approached, Sheriff Tanner confirmed what Samuel had begun to suspect. Chandler was operating beyond the reach of the limited law in the territory, using forged documents and intimidation to build his empire. I can't arrest him without proof, the sheriff explained, frustration evident in his voice. And no one's willing to testify against him. So he just takes what he wants? Samuel asked, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. Unless someone stops him. The sheriff gave Samuel a meaningful look. Be careful, Reed. Men like Chandler don't play fair. The night before Chandler's deadline, Samuel sat at the small table in Abigail's kitchen, cleaning his revolver by lamplight. George Hayes had finally come downstairs for dinner, still weak but recovering. You should both leave, Samuel said abruptly. Take what you can carry and head for Denver until this blows over. Abigail set down her teacup with deliberate care. This is our home. Everything my parents built is here. It's not worth your lives. George cleared his throat. The boy's right, Abby. We could start fresh somewhere else. Abigail looked between them, her blue eyes flashing with determination. And let Chandler win. Let him continue terrorizing everyone in this valley. She shook her head firmly. No, there has to be another way. As they discussed options, a sound from outside caught Samuel's attention, the soft nicker of a horse trying to be quiet. He extinguished the lamp with one quick movement, drawing his revolver. Get down, he whispered, moving to the window. The flash of gunfire came an instant later, bullets splintering the window frame as Samuel ducked. Abigail pulled her uncle to the floor as more shots rang out, punching through walls and shattering dishes. The back door, Samuel hissed, staying low as he moved toward them. Now, they crawled through the darkened house as bullets continued to tear through the front rooms. Samuel helped George to his feet as they reached the back entrance, then cautiously peered outside. The yard appeared empty, but he knew better than to trust appearances. Stay close to me. he instructed, leading them into the darkness toward the small stable behind the store. They had nearly reached it when a figure emerged from the shadows. Samuel pushed Abigail and George behind him, raising his weapon in one fluid motion. "That's far enough." Chandler's voice rang out as two more men appeared, rifles aimed. "Drop the gun, cowboy." Samuel assessed the situation with the cold clarity that came in moments of danger. 3 armed men, minimal cover, and 2 people depending on him. The odds were poor. "This is between you and me, Chandler," Samuel said, slowly lowering his weapon to the ground. "Let them go." Chandler stepped closer, moonlight revealing his satisfied smile. "That's not how this works. The girl signs over the store tonight, or none of you see morning." "I'll never sign," Abigail declared from behind Samuel. "We'll see about that." Chandler nodded to one of his men, who moved toward them. What happened next occurred so quickly that Samuel would later struggle to reconstruct the sequence. As the man reached for Abigail, Samuel launched himself forward, tackling the attacker. His sudden movement created just enough confusion for George to pull Abigail toward the stable as gunfire erupted once more. Samuel felt a searing pain across his ribs as a bullet grazed him, but adrenaline kept him moving. He wrestled the rifle from the man beneath him, swinging it like a club to knock him unconscious. Rolling to his feet, he fired at the second man, catching him in the leg. Chandler himself was moving toward the stable where Abigail and George had disappeared. Samuel sprinted after him, ignoring the burning in his side, and tackled him from behind. They crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs, Chandler's revolver discharging harmlessly into the air. "You're dead, cowboy," Chandler snarled, landing a punch that made Samuel's vision swim. They grappled in the dirt, each fighting for control of the weapon. Samuel's strength was waning, the blood loss from his wound beginning to tell, when a rifle report split the night. Chandler stiffened, then collapsed atop him. Samuel pushed the man's weight off to see Abigail standing in the stable doorway, one of the store's rifles steady in her hands. "Is he?" Samuel gasped, struggling to his feet. "Shoulder wound," Abigail said, her voice surprisingly steady for someone who had just shot a man. "I aim to wound, not kill." More hoofbeats sounded from the road, Sheriff Tanner and 3 deputized townsmen, drawn by the gunfire. "We heard the shooting from town," the sheriff explained, quickly assessing the situation. "Looks like you've had trouble." As the lawmen secured Chandler and his men, Samuel sank to his knees, the adrenaline finally ebbing to reveal the true extent of his injury. Abigail was at his side instantly, pressing a cloth to the bleeding gash across his ribs. "You need a doctor," she said, her calm facade cracking to reveal the fear beneath. Samuel caught her hand, suddenly needing her to understand something important. "I stayed because of you," he said, the words tumbling out with unexpected urgency. "Not the trouble. Not Chandler. You." Her eyes widened, but before she could respond, darkness claimed him. Samuel drifted in and out of consciousness for what seemed like days, fragments of reality interspersed with fever dreams. Sometimes he heard Abigail's voice, felt her cool hand on his forehead. Other times, he relived the raid on his family's homestead, his father's final words to him. "Live, Samuel. Find something worth living for." When he finally awoke fully, sunlight was streaming through unfamiliar curtains. He lay in a bed in what appeared to be a small bedroom, his torso heavily bandaged. As his eyes focused, he realized Abigail was sitting in a chair beside him, her head resting on the edge of the bed as she slept. Samuel reached out, gently touching her hair. She stirred immediately, relief flooding her face when she saw him conscious. "You're awake," she breathed. The doctor wasn't sure if. She stopped herself, composing her features. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd," Samuel admitted. "What happened with Chandler?" Sheriff Tanner found evidence in his saddlebags, forged loan documents for half the businesses in the valley. With that and the attempted murder charges, he won't trouble anyone again. Samuel nodded, satisfied. "And your uncle?" "Recovering well, thanks to you." Abigail hesitated, then added softly, "You saved us, Samuel. You saved everyone. You saved me too," he countered, remembering her standing fearlessly with the rifle. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Finally, Abigail asked the question he'd been dreading. "Will you leave when you're healed?" Samuel had asked himself the same question during his brief periods of consciousness. The answer had always been clear in the past. Never stay, never attach, never risk. But something fundamental had changed in him during these weeks in Elk Valley. That depends, he said carefully. On what? On whether there's a reason to stay. Abigail's eyes searched his face. What kind of reason would be enough? Samuel summoned his courage. You. If you wanted me to. The smile that bloomed across her face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. I thought a lone cowboy like you wasn't interested in settling down. I'm beginning to think I was wrong about a lot of things, Samuel admitted. Being alone doesn't make you safer. It just makes you alone. And is that what you want now? To not be alone? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Samuel reached for her hand, entwining their fingers. I want a chance to find out what it means to build something instead of just surviving. With you, if you'll have me. Her answer came not in words, but in the gentle press of her lips against his. A promise of possibilities neither had dared imagine. By early autumn, Samuel's wound had healed to a puckered scar across his ribs, a reminder of what he'd nearly lost before finding what he truly needed. The Hayes General Store had been repaired and expanded, with Samuel's carpentry skills transforming the modest building into the finest establishment in Elk Valley. On a crisp October morning, as golden aspen leaves drifted like coins in the mountain breeze, Samuel stood beside Abigail before the town's small church. George Hayes, fully recovered and beaming with pride, gave his niece's hand to the young cowboy who had saved not just their lives, but the entire community. Do you, Samuel Reed, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The preacher asked. Samuel looked into Abigail's eyes, the same eyes that had first captured him that fateful morning in the store. I do, he answered, his voice clear and certain in a way it had never been before. As they exchanged vows, Samuel thought of the false belief that had guided him for so long, that love was a vulnerability that would destroy him. Instead, he had discovered its opposite truth. Love was the only thing strong enough to heal the wounds of the past and build a future worth fighting for. After the ceremony, as they stood receiving congratulations from the townsfolk who had become family, Sheriff Tanner approached them with a knowing smile. Seems you found a reason to stay after all, he observed, shaking Samuel's hand. Samuel glanced at his bride, radiant in her simple white dress with wildflowers woven through her honey blonde hair. I found more than that. I found where I belong. That evening, as they stood on the porch of the small cabin they now shared behind the store, Samuel wrapped his arms around Abigail, watching the stars emerge above the mountains that had once represented only wilderness and solitude. Are you happy? She asked, leaning back against his chest. Happier than I ever thought possible, he answered truthfully. For years I believed the only way to survive was to remain alone, untethered. I was so wrong, Abigail. What I needed wasn't isolation, it was you. She turned in his arms, her face tilted up to his. And what about the lonesome cowboy who never stays in one place? What happened to him? Samuel smiled, touching his forehead to hers. He found his heart, and he's never letting it go. As winter settled over Elk Valley, Samuel and Abigail Reed's home became a beacon of warmth and welcome in the community. The lone cowboy who had once believed love was a dangerous weakness had discovered its true nature, not a vulnerability to be feared, but the greatest strength a man could possess on the untamed frontier.